Welcome to the Juanderful Therapist podcast. I am Juan Gutierrez, your host and associate clinical social worker working under the supervisions of a licensed therapist in California. In this podcast, we talk about psychotherapy, mental health topics, and have inspiring conversations. The information provided in this podcast is not substitute for mental health services. Any statements and opinions I make are representative of myself and separate from my employer. Please share this podcast with friends and families and provide us with feedback or suggestions for future episodes. With that said, thank you for tuning in. Now, let's have a wonderful time. Well, welcome to the first episode. It's been quite some time in the works. I will get into it, but I have a 7-month-old baby who's yet not sleeping through the night. So I take naps during my lunch instead of recording like I planned to do before we ran into this not sleeping phase. But with that said, this is the first episode of hopefully many to come. And let's get to the first question. So who am I? Like I said in the introduction, my name is Juan Gutierrez, and I live in California, United States. I am an associate clinical social worker, and I'll explain in a minute what that is. Pretty much, I provide therapy under the supervision of a licensed therapist. All these terms will define them because that is the goal and the hopes that I have for this podcast is to explain all these terminologies and all these words and phrases that you hear around mental health services. So yeah, coming back to me, kind of sounds selfish, but coming back to me, my name is Juan. I am married, and I have a wonderful boy. Like I said, he's 7 months. And I've been married for 6.5 years as of today, March 2023, to my wife. And we've known each other for a bit over 10 years, but we've been married for 6.5, going on 7 in this September. I was born and raised in Mexico, in a little fisherman's town, I call it, called Puerto Nuevo, Baja California. That is just across the border from San Diego, California. Then I moved to a larger city, Ensenada, which is a bit southern to Puerto Nuevo. It's about an hour and a half from the border, depending how fast you drive. Then I moved to San Diego when I was 11. I like to say that I was forced to move. My mom and my younger sister moved there with my stepdad a year earlier, and she let me stay with my grandma for another year. But then eventually, moved to San Diego when I was 11. Then I moved to the Oxnard, Ventura area in 2013. So 10 years ago, exactly 3 weeks ago. I think it was it was the end of February when I moved to the Oxnard, Ventura area. I graduated with my bachelor's from Azusa Pacific University. I did their online psychology program. I attended San Diego Community College first after graduating high school. Then I finished my last unit at Ventura Community College. Once I moved here, transferred to Azusa, finished the bachelor's online program. I worked for a bit using my bachelor's. I worked as a behavioral specialist. That's pretty much someone who works under a therapist and helps kiddos, teenagers, kiddos under 11 with their behaviors, getting angry, talking back, not listening to their parents, depression, suicidal ideation, all that kind of behavioral issues. That was my job, was to help the patient and provide support for the therapist, kind of like an extension of the therapist. And I did that for 2.5 years. Then I started grad school. I went to California State University, Long Beach. And I graduated, I'm going to have to brag, I graduated summa cum laude in Master's in Social Work in 2021. And that's how I ended up here at my current job as an associate clinical social worker. So what that means is that I am currently collecting hours, experience, in order to take my license test. And that just shows that I have gathered enough experience and that I have worked under the supervision of a licensed therapist, and I can provide therapy on my own without having to be supervised. So why I wanted to be a therapist? The simplest answers that I have found are two. One, I wanted to help others. The second one is I wanted for others to have access to what I had access when I was a teenager. We'll get a little bit more into that in a bit. Pretty much, I wanted to help others. So I didn't know what that looked like. Graduated high school, and I didn't really know how to become a therapist. I just wanted to get a bachelor's in psychology. And it wasn't until I was working as a behavioral specialist that my clinical supervisor encouraged me and guided me in the process, and she pointed me towards a direction of what degree will be best for me. She was very, very wise clinical supervisor, and that's how I solidify that I wanted to be a therapist. You turn from helping others to kind of teaching others to wanting to listen to others to eventually be a therapist who I think kind of does all of that. You know, we listen to people, we teach them life skills, we help them how to get over their current barriers and obstacles and challenges and stuck points, if we can call that. So that was my process. It all started with just wanting to help others, and it was a noble reason. It was a noble motive, but there wasn't really any guidance. But I was lucky and blessed enough that I had a great mentor, clinical mentor in my life. So, like I said, I received help when I was a teenager. I went through a lot of stuff as an immigrant, as a teenager without a father figure. It was quite the roller coaster, but I was lucky and blessed to have someone in my life. Vicente Urbina, he was there for me, supporting me, guiding me, counseling me, unofficially, but counseling me, and just being that positive role model that I needed at that time. I made some big boo-boos, some big mistakes, and he stuck around. And that just kind of started a fire in me, if we can call it that. It started a curiosity of what it would look like if I go back and help others myself. And that's what I'm doing now. I work at an agency here in Ventura County that provides mental health services for children and teenagers and their families as well. Mental health services, when I say mental health services, for my end, I mean therapy. That's what I do most of the time. I do a little bit of case management, but most of my work is surrounded around therapy. So that's how I ended up being a therapist. I love it. I love what I do. I walk out of my office every day with a sense of achievement, even if it's a chaotic, busy day. I still walk out of my office with a sense of achievement because someone got helped in my office. And that's what I look for every day. It comes with challenges, and it comes with, all the bureaucracy of having a job. But at the end of the day, I'm satisfied with what I did. And now, to the podcast part of it. So why am I doing this? Why am I doing a podcast? Two reasons. Reason number one, it actually started with me wanting to write a book. Like I said, I graduated in 2021, and I was just, I want to use the word confused, and yeah, just confused. That's the best word to say, to use, of how much people are not familiar with mental health services. But not only that, but how that unfamiliarity creates a sense of fear and stigma. Part of my research project to graduate my program was to work around this and provide information of services and resources to a community. And it was quite incredible to see the disconnection between the community and the agencies. But it wasn't because the agencies were not trying to provide the services. They were providing the services. And it wasn't because people didn't have access to the services. They did have access. They were nearby. They had transportation. They were accessible to an extent in our area. But it was the stigma, the unfamiliarity, the fear, the tension of having to access mental health services. And I noticed that a lot of it had to do with people, clients, patients, whatever we want to call it, not knowing what to expect, not knowing the lingo, the words that we use that were intimidating. There were, big words that some of these people have never heard. And if they're Spanish speakers or other language that is not English, some of those words don't translate to their native language. Some of those words they probably never heard in their native country. So the disparity, the gap was the lack, from my opinion, it was the lack of knowledge about the terms, the lack of education of what is it, what are they talking about, how do I go about this, how do I get started. So that's what I wanted to write a book about, like the basic of therapy, right? Like the basics of therapy. Like if you were thinking of taking, if you were thinking of going to therapy, or if someone mentioned to you, you have to go to therapy, or in some cases, you're kind of told you have to go to therapy. My hope was to create a book that you can pick up and read in one seat, close it, and be as comfortable as you can be going to therapy and knowing what to expect and knowing what the words that you were gonna hear meant, and how to go in with the plan. Now, I said I wanted to write a book. As I did the outline, and I think I wrote 2 chapters. I still have them in my files, and I still have the rest of the chapters outlined. But after 2 chapters, and after kind of researching the book publishing process, I realized that was just going to be time consuming, first of all. And then second of all, it's having a book published is not as easy as it sounds. There are many steps. English is not my first language, so I would have to hire an editor to go over everything, my grammar and stuff. Sell it to a publisher, like present it to a publisher, have it printed, promoted, and all that. It's just, no, thank you. I'm a huge fan of podcasts. So it wasn't until one day that I was listening to one of my podcasts in my runs, And I just had that moment of like, wait a minute, why don't I just convert the book to a podcast? A book, you print it and it stays like that. And, until you do another edition, it doesn't really change. It's just kind of static until you do another edition, and then it stays static for another years, and then another edition, and so on. But I realized that a podcast is ever changing. It's constantly evolving. New information comes out. I can record it in one sitting. I don't have to go through a publisher. I can just present it myself, do the research myself, have the discussion with colleagues, coworkers, and I can publish it at my rate, at my pace. And that's kind of how I went from a book to a podcast. So that's the first reason why I'm doing this. And the second reason, like I mentioned a bit, it was to have a resource that it's available, that it's free, that it's easily accessible if you have an internet connection, which a lot of people nowadays do through their cell phones, and have access to a podcast application or a website, and you can just click and let's go. You can learn about therapy, know the basics, and you're good to go. So those are the two main reasons. So it is my hope to bring information about mental health and make it more normal, more accessible, that people feel more familiar with what they're getting into. I'll be honest, sometimes us therapists, we don't explain things very well to our clients when it comes to like the type of approaches that we're using. We'll do informed consent, and that means that we'll explain as best as we can in a short amount of time what we're gonna do, what are some of the risks, what are some of the benefits, what is it gonna take for you to do the work. We'll do that type of informed consent, but to like sit down, talk about the research, how this style, modality, or therapy type came about, or what is it, efficient for or not for, or, expand on it. We don't have much time. I'm a strong believer that if you present the information to people as plain as you can and as well informed as you can, they can make the choice for their treatment. So that is what my hope is to bring that information to them, because therapy is such a great resource. I have received therapy myself, and it has impacted my life. It's a huge benefit. So I'm a strong believer that therapy works. I've seen the benefits. I've experienced the benefits. So I know that if I provide such services, people will experience the benefits of therapy. And I think having the information available beforehand and getting ready can help so much, to alleviate that anxiety and that nervousness of going to your first therapy session, how to look for a therapy, how to look for, specific type of therapy style or modality, as we call it, because you may think it may work for you. All that's what I hope that you can get out of this podcast. And I just believe that people should know more about what to expect of the therapeutic process, how to prepare themselves, and just understand the little nuances, the little details that come with getting into a therapy service, a mental health service. And with all that, I hope to reduce the stigma of therapy or any type of mental health services, because once we reduce that stigma and that fear, a lot of people can benefit from it. And that's what I hope to do. So that is the first episode. It's just an introduction of myself and the reasons for this podcast to exist and what I hope for this podcast to do. And I hope that you come with us along the way and you learn and you use the information that I provide, because it's so important for everyone to be mentally well as well as physically well. Tongue twister. So that is my hope. Thank you for tuning in to the first episode of the Juanderful Therapist podcast. And if you're wondering how Juanderful came about, I don't know how, when, where, who called me Mr. Wonderful one time. I hear so many puns with my name, Juan, and it just stuck with it. It just got stuck with me. And when I was trying to come up with the name for the podcast, I just kept thinking about Wonderful. And I thought it would be funny. I believe in humor, so I thought that was a funny name. So that is why this podcast is called A Juanderful Therapist, and why we're trying to have a wonderful time. So with that said, thank you for tuning in. Hope to see you in the next episode.